Welcome to Power Outages 101. What we're going to be doing in this video is going over all of the differences, pros and cons of gas generators versus battery power stations, and also going over what you need to know to make sure you purchase the right one to power your house or whatever you need to power in a power outage. Now there's going to be a lot of information on this video, so what we're going to be doing is down in the first comment below and also in the description, I'm going to have timestamps of everything. So if you need to jump to something because you already know what I'm talking about and you don't want to listen to me yammer on, you can just click through, click forward, and get to the stuff that you need to find out about. Now, I do want to talk briefly about why I'm making this video and why I'm making it right now. Literally, as I'm filming this, the Palisade fire is still burning, homes are still burning, and I personally have friends that have lost their homes in this fire. So that's why I'm making this, because although the fire is burning and those people are impacted, everybody around that is being hit with power outages. And we've had power outages going on for 2 weeks now. So this has been an ongoing discussion point on a lot of online groups. And there's been a lot of good information, but also a lot of bad information. So I wanted to kind of put it all in one place so you have a resource to figure out what you need, what you don't need, so you can go out and buy the right thing to keep your house up and running. Before we get further into the video, I do want to address two things really quick. First is the comment section. I have seen comment sections on anything regarding the fires immediately turn into a political boxing match. That's not going to happen here. All those comments are going to vaporize. I hope the comment section here can be a helpful comment section where people can post questions and put recommendations up and help each other out. If I see those comments, if they happen to slip through the filters I've already put in place, they're going to be nuked. So please don't do it. The other thing I want to mention is YouTubers make a little bit of ad revenue off of all of their videos. And I debated not monetizing this video at all, but I decided to monetize it because what I'm going to be doing is every month I'm going to be taking the money that this video makes and I'm going to be donating it to one of the charities that is helping fire victims of not just the Palisades fire, but all the fires that are happening right now in California. After 12 months, I'm going to reassess and those funds might be going elsewhere. We're just going to see what's happening in the country because this is a community effort, not just the California community, not just the US community. We will globally should be looking out for each other. So I'm going to be taking any money past that 12 months, reassessing, and we'll see where it goes, but it will be going to a charity or nonprofit helping out people in need. Related to that, I will also have links to some charities, some really great charities that are doing some great work right now. Okay, let's talk about batteries and generators. But the first thing before you start shopping is you need to figure out how much juice you need. So let's go inside. So we'll go over how to do the math in a very simple way to figure out how much power you need to be able to put out to power your stuff. And in the case of these batteries, how much storage you need to keep things going long term. So figuring out your electrical demand is going to be the most important thing you do before you go shopping for a generator or a power bank. So right now we're going to figure out the wattage. How much does your generator need to put out? Now, if you happen to be in another country other than the US where it is based on 220 current and not 110 current, a lot of the rules here still apply. You're just going to have to do math a little bit differently, and there's a lot of online calculators that can help you out. A little later in the video, we're going to figure out storage capacity on the batteries, but right now, we're just figuring out how much juice your generator is actually going to put out. So I found a website called generatordecisions.com, and it's got a bunch of information about how to pick out a generator. So I'm not affiliated with the site. I just stumbled on them when doing some research for this video, and they do have this thing. It's a handy dandy chart that'll tell you how much most of the stuff around your house is going to consume. But right now let's talk about refrigerators, because I'm assuming most people watching this video are homeowners or renters or whatever, but you're in a home and you're trying to keep your home running and you've got hundreds of dollars and stuff in that fridge and you got to eat. So you want to run your fridge. And also the reason I'm bringing up refrigerators is fridges are a little wonky. So when you plug in a light bulb, the light bulb says 60 watts on it, it's pulling 60 watts of electricity. Fridges are a little bit different because fridges have basically 3 different amounts that they run at. So I'll explain kind of how a refrigerator works very briefly. Refrigerator is basically a big box that's insulated, and it has a unit in it that cools it off, just like an air conditioner. So when the box gets too warm, it kicks on, it cools it back off down to where it needs to be, and then it shuts itself down, it sits idle until the temperature comes back up. That's how a refrigerator works. So when your refrigerator is sitting, not having to cool anything, it's probably pulling almost nothing. We're talking like 10 watts or so, enough to basically run the computers or whatever that's running the fridge. Once that fridge gets too warm, now everything kicks on. And with the compressor and everything running, it's all over the place. So this is why you got to figure it out for your fridge. So I'm going to use the example. Let's just say with it running, it's going to be pulling 600 watts. And I'm just pulling numbers out of air. So 600 watts. That's not the only number though. It also has a surge of power that it requires to start the compressor in the first place. And that could jump up to 1200, 1400 watts, but that's just for a very short amount of time. But when you're calculating all this, you have to assume the most because you need to be able to push out that juice. So if your refrigerator takes, let's say 1200 watts total during that startup, that's your first number. So now grab a piece of paper, start a spreadsheet, write it on the back of your hand, whatever, 1200 watts for your refrigerator. You gotta do the calculation for yours. Now start thinking about the other stuff you wanna run. So say on top of that, you wanna be able to run a computer. Well, you want to check the power supply on that computer and see how much it pulls. This computer here, it's not plugged in right now, pulls about 60 watts. So we're going to add 60 to that number, and now we're at 1260. But you need internet. So now we're going to go over and figure out how much juice our modem pulls and our router pulls. And that's depending upon what you got. I think mine is about 100 or so. It's a little less than that to run both. So we're going to add that on, and our number starts creeping up. Once you've calculated everything out, now you have a baseline to work with. So now you know, so you've added everything up and you've got 1800 watts. Well, now you know that one of those 2000 watt generators would be just fine. If you want to add a microwave to it though, the microwave can pull up to another 800 to 1000 watts. Now you're over that 200 threshold. So now you have a decision to make. Do you want to buy a bigger generator, or do you want to just be careful with what you have plugged in? If you need to run the microwave for 5 minutes, there's no reason why you can't go and unplug the refrigerator for 5 minutes to run the microwave. I would always recommend go larger than go just enough. Okay, so we're back in the garage. We just figured out how much juice we need to keep everything running. So let's talk about gas generators. All the pros and cons. So what we're going to do, let's talk about gas generators, all the pros and cons and things to consider, and you can decide whether these are your solutions. So first thing to look for is you want to make sure you get an inverter generator. Inverter. You want an inverter generator. The reason you want an inverter generator is because inverters send a clean electrical signal into your house, is the best way for me to explain it without getting into the weeds on it. A non-inverter generator can damage sensitive electronics, things like computers, modems, routers, TVs, stuff like that. A non-inverter generator can damage that stuff. You want to make sure you get an inverter generator. The other nice thing with inverter generators is they are typically a lot quieter than not inverter generators. Speaking of sound, generators can be extremely loud or ridiculously quiet, depending upon what generator you purchase. Both of these generators here, this one is my generator. I use it to power my house, and this one is my parents' generator, a slightly smaller one, on loan to me in exchange for an oil change. Both of these are what they would call a whisper or a quiet generator. But when they do these, they rate them by decibels. So you want to make sure you get one that is quiet. So when you're shopping around, compare the decibel ratings on them. You don't want to be annoying yourself or your neighbors. Nothing's worse than when these things humming away full blast in your ear for a week straight. So now that we've covered that, you want to look at the output. This one is a 2000 watt. This is a 3500 watt. And those are kind of for the smaller household, whatever you want to call them, generators. These are kind of the two most typical power ranges. They do make ones that are smaller. I would not recommend ever going smaller than 2000 watts for this purpose. 3500 is kind of a nice sweet spot if you want to be running a lot of stuff, and there are ones that do a lot more. Now, all of these generators have regular 110 outlets on them, so you can plug your appliances or extension cords right into them. The larger ones, the 3500s, generally have a 30 amp or larger circuit that you can run a larger line into. If you're familiar with like RV power, it's that kind of a larger line. With this generator, what I do is I don't run extension cords into my house. I run a cable from this to a transfer switch on the side of my house, and that backfeeds my entire house and keeps specific circuits up online. It's something you can do with these larger generators with larger plugs on them. But these ratings are where that math comes in, is you have to figure out the peak. So like when things like your refrigerator and the compressors and all your microwaves cycle on, you need to figure out what the most power you need is, and then you want to have a little bit of overhead just in case. So do that math and kind of figure out, is a 3500 right for you? Is a 2000 right for you? Or should you go even higher? Because like I said, there are other options. So now let's kind of jump into kind of the pros and the cons and things to consider with gas generators. So first, let's hit some of those pros. So a gas generator runs on gasoline. Makes sense, right? So you can run a gas generator pretty much indefinitely as long as you have gasoline and a couple things to keep the generator up and running long term. Gasoline can be had at a local gas station, and you can store a lot of it on site in gas cans. Dollar for dollar, you're going to get more juice from a gas generator than one of these things, battery banks. Now here's some things to consider with gas generators, not necessarily negatives, but just things to consider. Gas generators do require maintenance to keep them going. They do need oil changes, they occasionally need spark plug changes, they typically have a spark arrestor on the exhaust that needs to be cleaned every time you do a oil change, and you need to deal with gasoline and keeping your gasoline stable. Now, none of this stuff is hard stuff. It's stuff that even if you're not handy, you can teach yourself how to do this stuff pretty quickly and easily. What I would recommend with fuel is coming up with a fuel storage plan. Fuel goes bad, or gasoline goes bad. I always put fuel stabilizer in my gasoline that's going into gas cans. When I go to the fuel pumps, I put the stabilizer in, then I fuel it. Everything gets stabilizer that's going into one of these cans. And then what I do is I put a piece of tape on top of it, and I put the date that I filled it. That way, when I hit the 1 year point, I put little reminders in my phone. I take that gas, I dump it into my car, and I put fresh gas in there. That way I never have bad gas laying around. The same goes for the gas in your generator. You either want to drain it, or at a minimum drain the carburetor so you don't have gas sitting in the carburetor going funky. If you don't have the option, like this one, it's very difficult to get in there and drain the carburetor. What I do is once a month or so, I go out and I start this thing up and I run it for like 20, 30 minutes, lets it purge all itself out. It keeps it happy. Now, generators are heavy. This thing is really a two-person lift. I can manhandle this thing into the bed of my truck, but I wouldn't recommend it. That one is like carrying around a heavy suitcase. So weight is also a consideration depending upon, if you're planning on storing this thing in a shed in your garage, but then have to lug it to the backyard, you want to think about who's going to be moving this thing and can they pick up or lift something. These are on wheels, but can you wheel it to where you need to get it? All things to kind of think about. If you realize you need something this size, but you don't want to deal with the weight, you can, in a lot of cases, depending on your unit, buy two of these and daisy chain them together and essentially get one of these, except you're running two of those. Now, you also have to consider where you live and where this generator is going to be. You don't want this thing sitting right outside your bedroom window if you're planning on running it at night. You also don't want it sitting right outside your neighbor's bedroom window while you're running it at night. And that also means make sure you can even run one at all. You might be in an apartment where you have a little balcony and you can't run one on your balcony because you're going to gas out your neighbors. You might have an HOA that says you can't run one. So check and make sure that you can actually run one of these things before you jump and buy one, because you don't want to get this thing home and find out you can't use it in the first place. All right, so we've rearranged because now we are sitting on the gas generator and we're going to talk about these. These are the battery packs, battery power stations, solar generators, whatever people are calling them this week. So the short of it is what these are is a big old battery with an inverter and some plugs. And it has a couple different ways to charge it. That's what these are. So these do the same job as a gas generator in giving you electricity. It just does it in a different fashion. Now, the way these work in a power outage is you would charge these up before the power outage, and now you've got a full battery. When the power goes out, you turn these things on and you power your appliances or whatever you need to power off of them. A lot of the same rules apply. Now, all of these have an inverter in them, so you don't have to worry about getting an inverter versus a non-inverter, but all of these have a power rating and different kinds of plugs. Now you see here, these have regular 110 outlet plugs, so you can plug any normal appliance into them. Some of the larger ones though, this one and this one, have larger plugs, like a 30 amp connector. So, that's kind of, if you're familiar with RVs and stuff like that, it's one of those. What's nice about those, same as this guy, is I can backfeed my entire house with it instead of having to run extension cords through the house with some of the smaller units. So a lot of your options are pretty much the same between gas and electric when it comes to output. You just need to figure out how much juice you need, and then you buy the appropriate device. However, the other thing you have to consider with these is not just output, but capacity, because it might be able to put out the juice, but the other issue is how long can it put out the juice? So let's go back inside and do some energy math so you can figure out what you need capacity-wise in one of these to keep your stuff up and running. Okay, so now we get to do some more math. Sorry. So now we have to figure out capacity. So before we figured out how much juice the generator or power station is going to have to put out, now it's the capacity. How long can it put out that power? So capacity in these is measured in a couple things. It's either going to be measured in watt hours, amp hours, or in the case of really large battery systems, kilowatt hours. For the purpose of these, we're pretty much just going to be dealing with amp hours and watt hours. So this is where the math gets really kind of funky. So at 110 volts, which is household current in the United States, and that's where I live, so that's the market I'm kind of talking to. So if you're in one of those countries that uses 210 current, first, I am jealous because your electric tea kettles work way better than ours do here, but you're gonna have to do the math a little bit different. And like I said earlier, there are a lot of online calculators that can help you out with that. So at 110 volts, 1 amp hour is equal to 110 watt hours. So if you're having to do some conversions, you might have to do that math. Fortunately, all these conversions can be done very easily using a computer or a phone. You can do all the calculations in there for you, so you don't have to do all the math. Also, that website that I told you about earlier, the generator decision website, that one also has tables that can help you out with all this stuff, and all that'll be linked down below. So how I would suggest you doing these calculations is I would do the calculations in watt hours, because that's going to be probably the easiest for most of your small appliances. Because when you take a light bulb, a 60 watt light bulb, that light bulb, if you run it for an hour, is going to consume 60 watt hours. If you're powering your modem at your house and your modem and your router is 110 watts, that's now going to be 110 watt hours. That's because it can run, you do the math. So you can start adding all these things together. Now, remember in the last chunk of this, I talked about refrigerators. You're going to run into the same issue with refrigerators here. And that is because with a refrigerator, it's not always running full bore. It's kind of all over the place. But there's an easy way to calculate this as well. And that is pretty much all refrigerators now have an Energy Star sticker on them. And I'm going to stick that thing right there. And what that thing will tell you is down near the bottom, you'll notice it says 630 kilowatt hours. That's how many kilowatt hours this thing is going to consume in a year. So you can take that and kind of do the math from that to figure out how much it'll use per hour. So what you want to do, 630 kilowatt hours, you want to change that to watt hours. And this is where the math is really going to get funky, and using some of the online calculators is really going to help you out. So I'm going to have a link for all those down below. So we're going to take 630 kilowatt hours and we're going to convert it to watt hours. So we're going to go 630 kilowatt hours, convert, and that's going to run us out to 630,000 watt hours. Now we're going to take that 630,000 watt hours. So now I'm going to go back into my calculator here, put in 630,000 watt hours. We're going to divide that by 365 days in a year. It's going to get us to 1,726. Now we're going to divide that again by 24 hours in the day, and that gets us to 71.91 watt hours. So that's what it's going to be consuming in an hour. So now you can add that 71.9 to all of your other things, and that'll get you a total. So now let's say, for example, we take that and we add a couple other devices on, and we come up with a total of 300 watt hours because we're running this, our server modem, and a couple of lights. So now we know that a battery this size would be able to do all that for 2.5 hours. And we can kind of go up from there on that battery until we figure out how big of a battery we need to power all of our stuff for the length of time that we're targeting. All right, so we're back out in the garage. You've figured out capacity now. So now you have two numbers to work with when it comes to batteries, and that is output and capacity. But now we have to talk about what happens when you drain these things down. How do you fill them back up again? Because it's not a gas tank. You can't just pour electricity back into them. So all of these you can plug into a standard 110 wall socket. So when the power comes back on, or if you have a place where you can get power, you can plug them back in and charge these back up. This one, and this one. Most of this size range can power from dead to full in about an hour, some of them an hour and a half. These larger ones take 2 to 3 hours. It's just a lot more juice you got to push into them. If you don't have access to a 110 outlet, you also have the option of solar charging it or charging this thing with your car. So you can go out to your car, start your car, run your car as a gas generator, and plug it in through the cigarette lighter. It's going to be pretty darn slow though. The other option is solar. Now, the thing to consider with solar is these panels are all rated. This is a 100-watt panel, and each one of these has a rating for how many watts they can take in. For example, I think these ones, I could be wrong, I think these are 200. These ones will take, I think, 1,000 watts, and this thing is even more than that. Like I said, this is a 100-watt panel, but that is 100 watts in perfect conditions, meaning high noon, panels pointed straight at the sun, not a cloud in the sky, no humidity, Mercury's in retrograde, and you happen to be in the middle of Death Valley. Highest I've seen out of these is the mid-90s, so I've gotten close, but I would typically, with good conditions, say you're gonna get about 80 watts out of a 100-watt panel. So you're gonna have to do that math. What you have to figure out is how many panels you need to keep your battery up and running. So that's a whole other bit of math you're gonna have to do on your own, but say you're trying to power 400 watts of stuff with this thing. Well, 400 watts of solar, you really need more like 5, and that's just gonna keep up with demand. But when the sun goes down, you're gonna drain this thing back down. So you gotta kind of play that game of how much overhead do you need with the panels. And that's kind of math you're gonna have to figure out on your own. So pros and cons and considerations with these electric things. I use these things a lot in conjunction with my gas generators, and let's kind of talk about that. These ones are great. You can throw them in the trunk of a car and you can bring them with you, and that way you can charge up your stuff. You can plug these into your car to charge them back up while you're going down the road. The big thing you don't have to deal with these things is you don't have to deal with exhaust and storing gasoline. So first, exhaust. If you live in a place where you can't run a generator because of the exhaust, you've got an apartment or a condo or whatever, these are a great option that we didn't have 15 years ago, where you can kind of run stuff without having to deal with the noise and the exhaust. Also, gasoline and gasoline storage. Depending upon where you live, you might not have a place to store gasoline, or you might just not want to deal with gasoline. I don't blame you, gasoline's stinky. What you do have to deal with is how to charge these in solar panels, which we just kind of talked about. Now, the other cool thing that I use these things for is these will also function as an uninterruptible power supply, a UPS. I can plug, like right now, I have one of these on my wife's desk. It is plugged into the wall. All of her stuff is plugged into that. Under normal conditions, it's a pass-through. Juice is just powering my wife's desk. She works from home. She's got a home office. Power goes out. Her desk nothing changes. It just keeps running. It just starts drawing off the battery. So if the power goes out, my wife can just keep working because time is money. And then when she has a break or wants to deal with it, then she can go out, deal with firing up the generators, at which point these all start charging back up because my house is back fed. Now, the big considerations first, and I had mentioned it with the gassers, is cost. Dollar for dollar, watt for watt, these are going to be more expensive than gas. I haven't seen that kind of play out yet. And it's not just the cost of the unit itself. If you're dealing with this in a power outage situation, you're also having to think about solar panels. So if this is the only thing you've got and you don't have a way to charge them back up with a gas generator, you're gonna have to invest in some solar panels, adding additional cost. And you really need to think hard about capacity on these and figure out what your power needs actually are and how long do you think realistically you need to be prepared for a power outage. Because if you're just preparing to run a fridge for a couple of hours, these things are dynamite. But in like what we just experienced, 2 weeks of no power, this thing would get my fridge a couple of days. But then I would be out of luck if I couldn't recharge it somewhere. Now, before you go out and spend any money on anything, I would also advise you check with your power provider. I am, unfortunately, a SoCal Edison customer, but SoCal Edison is offering all sorts of rebates and discounts and free stuff when it comes to generators and power banks if you fall into certain categories. So check on that before you spend your money. You might be able to get a little bit of a discount or get something for free. PG&E and a bunch of other companies are doing similar stuff, so check with those before you spend money. Finally, I do want to say a humongous thank you to all of the nonprofit groups, the volunteer groups, and anybody who is doing anything to try to make this situation a little bit better. Also, thank you to all of the first responders, firefighters, paramedics, police, Our neighbors to the north in Canada who have sent down firefighting resources and aircraft. Navajo Nation who sent an entire team of their firefighters. Our neighbors to the south in Mexico who have sent up hundreds of firefighters. It's a community effort, and it's not just a community effort in California or just for the brush fires, but it should be a community effort anytime there's a big natural disaster or any disaster. That's what community's for. So that's why I want to keep the comment section the way I said we're going to keep the comment section. So be good, everybody. Hope everybody stays safe. Thumbs up, subscribe, all that YouTuber stuff kind of seems inconsequential right now, but would be cool if you did. And of course, thanks for watching.